Welcome to the Brand Fortress HQ podcast. Today we've got another Amazon Tactics Tuesday, and we're talking about kind of the combination of a couple of different things. So we're going to be talking on this Tactics Tuesday about not only geo-ranking, which we had an amazing episode with Eddie Wheeler on. So if you haven't listened to that, I highly recommend that you go back and listen to that because Eddie talks quite a bit about geo-ranking. We're going to talk about that in combination with actually old school mail in order to essentially juice your geo-ranking. And of course, one of the other things that I would encourage folks to take a look at, and there's going to be a link to it as well, is our after purchase funnel. If you're like, hey, where do I get these addresses from? We talk about that in our after purchase funnel course that we offer right now for free, along with some of our previous episodes where we talk about, how you build that funnel and how you build a list. So with that said, Mike, I'm going to turn it over to you to talk about how you can use something like old school mail in order to do geo-ranking, maybe even just starting with what the heck is geo-ranking for somebody that maybe didn't hear that interview with Eddie.
Sure. Yeah. So to just simplify it, really to the bare bones, geo-ranking really just refers to the fact that, a lot of sellers assume that, if they go to Amazon and they do a search for a particular keyword, and then they look to see where their product shows up, that is their ranking, right? Like it's a global ranking in some way. And that's just not true. The reality is, if you search for your product, and you can test this very easily. If you just open a private window, pull up the Amazon, marketplace, and then up in the upper left-hand corner, if you're in a private window, so Amazon doesn't know who you are, you would have to enter in what zip code you want any products that you might order shipped to, right? So choose zip codes from around the country. Choose, 4 quadrants, and pick, 4 different zip codes, right? Put in the zip code and then search for any specific, major key phrase for a particular product that you sell. And you will find that in all 4 of those zip codes, and you can do this for 10, 20, 100 zip codes, all of them will have different ranking for that very exact same keyword and that exact same product. And you would be surprised, and as I was when I first realized that this was a thing, just how disparate those rankings can be. We have rankings that are like number 2, number 3 in some regions, and in another region we're number 15 for the very same, very same keyword, very same product. So, and you can imagine obviously how much differential there is between the number of sales that are going to come in from a search in a region where you're ranked number 3 versus where you're ranked number 15. So geo-ranking is an actual thing. It's something you should be paying attention to. And more importantly, it's not just a thing to be able to see and recognize that it happens, but you can actually change it. You can adjust it. You can utilize that to your advantage. And that's what this tactic is all about, is basically finding an old school method to juice your rankings in those areas where you're not ranking so well at very low cost. And it's something that a lot of other sellers aren't going to be doing. So you have an advantage there.
Yeah, I think we're starting to hear more and more about geo-ranking, especially now that you can target customers, and this is very new that's come out through sponsored display. So if you've had access to DSP before, you have actually had an opportunity to geo-target for the brands that maybe aren't big enough in order to quite yet, invest in in DSP. Then sponsored display is really, at least on the Amazon platform, your first bite at the apple. But then of course, Google has geo-targeting capability, and so does Facebook. So with that said, before we dive into kind of, this, what I think is a very smart method for targeting people, let's talk a little bit about, in our notes before the show, you talked about geographic demand for your product, where you see that demand at versus delivery time. So do you have any insights to how sellers should think about areas that they should target?
Sure. So there's a few kind of key things here that are relevant. So when you're thinking about this idea of geo-ranking, the reason for the discrepancy, in my mind, and if you listen to Eddie talk, seems to be this way, is most of the parameters that Amazon's algorithm pays attention to in order to determine where to rank you are global. They're universal. So in other words, your click-through rates and your conversion rates to a degree are global, although they will be different geographically, and it's possible that that comes into play here. But also, all of the other things that Amazon takes into account are more global in nature. So they affect all of your keywords everywhere at once, right? The difference here is there's a couple of factors that come into play that are very geographically targeted and that affect that ranking. And one of them would be demand. So if you think about it, especially if you're using FBA, right? Amazon is going to pay very close attention to where is there actually demand for your specific product. And if they determine, or if the algorithm, more correctly determines that there isn't demand for your product in a particular region, then why, first of all, would Amazon rank you for that keyword in that region if they don't feel there's demand, right? Why would they put you there? They don't think anybody wants your product, so they're going to rank other products that they do think people want. But the second thing that comes into play there is if they don't believe that there's demand for your product in that region, why would they ship your inventory to that region, right? Because they're distributing your inventory. Like they tell you where to ship it, but then from there, we all know they do a lot of FC transfer from there to various different warehouses around the US. Why would they transfer your inventory to a region that they don't believe there's demand for your product? They're not going to. They don't send it there. So what happens is it's a double flywheel, right? If Amazon doesn't think there's demand, then they don't ship inventory there. Well, if there's no inventory there, then what happens to your delivery times for anybody who's in that region? Your delivery times are longer, and they're longer than your competitors. And Amazon does take into account for ranking. I've been able to verify this. I've checked this for numerous keywords, for numerous products that we have, and it is almost without fail if we check from that geo-ranking perspective. When we check the ones where we're ranked lower versus where we're ranked higher, our delivery times are extended out further in those places where we're not ranked as well. And most all of the products that rank better than us have a sooner delivery time than our product. So if Amazon doesn't think there's demand, and so therefore they're not going to rank you, and because they don't think there's demand, they don't send your inventory there, so delivery times are longer. Now you have two distinct parameters that Amazon clearly uses in their algorithm for ranking, both of them working against you. So your ranking is lower. So how do you fix that? The simplest way is to directly tell Amazon that there actually is demand for your product in that zip code or in that region, right? Because as soon as you tell them there's demand, now, number one, they want to rank you. And number two, they know if they're going to rank you, well, then they better send inventory there, because if people want it and they click on it and they want to order it, there better be inventory to ship to them and they should get it there fast, right? So as soon as you tell Amazon there is actually demand in that region for your product, your ranking starts to improve. They send inventory to that region, which also begins to improve your ranking. And once that ranking improves, what happens? Not only do you start getting sales volume, so your global BSR is going to improve and your sales velocity is improving, which is another factor for ranking. In addition to that, your click-through rate and conversion rate in that region, which of course is also going to affect your global click-through and conversion rate, is going to go up. Because again, if your delivery times are better, then people are going to be more likely to click on your product and more likely to buy your product because they want to get the product sooner. So all of those parameters that affect your ranking are now getting juiced by that one single thing that you did, which was to simply tell Amazon, we have demand for our product in that region. So the question then becomes, what are the mechanisms that are available to you to actually juice that and tell Amazon, people want our product there? How do you do that? And there's multiple ways that you can do it. One of them is the strategy that I want to teach now. But of course, you can use Facebook, or you can use Google, or you can use any number of ways that you could potentially choose that algorithm. You could even use, if you have a current list of customers and you happen to have their addresses, right? So the mechanism that we use for collecting customer data is warranties, and they give us their address. 90% of our registrants give us their address. So we could literally just use our list and segment it out by addresses and by zip codes, and we could connect with those customers and point them to our product and get very high, conversion rates on that for a specific zip code so that we could juice that. not what I'm talking about today, but it is an option.
So, okay, there's a bunch of different, mechanisms that you talked about for reaching out. And again, I think of what's really important to double click on there is that you may have areas in the country where your product isn't selling because the delivery time is so slow, and therefore you rank a lot lower. So it's kind of a chicken and egg problem
Right.
for sellers where, let's say that, they sell really well in California, but they don't sell very well in Florida. It may just be that there wasn't enough momentum for whatever reason in Florida to where, because the fulfillment center is so far away, that they don't fulfill, that product doesn't actually reach the customer for 3 to 4 days. So the
Right.
conversion rate is a lot lower. And as a result, their ranking, like you said, they might be third in California, but 40th in Florida when we look at that based
And that's
on the
exactly what
geo.
we've seen. Like, I mean, we sell pool tools, right? So, it never occurred to me that there was actually a difference, in terms of geo ranking. And, this time of year, I mean, we're talking, it's February, right? So nobody but Florida, Southern California, Southern Texas, like nobody else has their pools open, basically. So we should be now all of Florida right now is essentially warm enough where people could have their pools open and likely using them, right? But all of Florida, we have worse rankings in Florida than we have in California. We just recently were going through those numbers and looking at them, and I was quite frankly shocked at just how much differential there was, in our rankings. And so therefore, clearly we're not selling that much in Florida. And I went back and checked, and we're not. I mean, we should be selling gobs of product in Florida compared to anywhere else, and we're not. So we have to choose that algorithm, that mechanism. The simplest way to do that is just tell Amazon, hey, there's people here who want our product. And so, that's what we're doing.
Okay. So then one of the things when we first started talking about this, we talked about a number of different ways that you can kind of geo-target. One of them that's fairly new that is actually now, part of anybody who has an Amazon ad account that they can use through sponsored display. And then, Facebook, well, let's take DSP first, if you have that available to you, and then Facebook and Google. Now, what interests you in kind of using old school mailers or as a marketing tool for geo ranking?
So now this might not work for every brand. All right. So that's the first thing. Now, it doesn't mean you couldn't use direct mail. I'm using a very specific type of direct mail that's a very inexpensive option. Going a different route would be a little bit more pricey. But it doesn't mean you couldn't do it. You very likely could do it cost effectively, but it might take a little bit more iteration and a little bit more split testing to get it to the point where at least you were breaking even on it. So this is at the front end of this conversation. The one thing that I want to mention is because at the moment the only thing that we're really talking about is juicing the algorithm, right? So we don't actually need a lot of sales to go through in order to juice the algorithm with Amazon and convince them that there's demand there. Okay. So in terms of the cost on this, even if you were losing money on this direct mail option that I'm going to suggest, it might very well still be worth it because you might not necessarily have to do it for very long to juice the algorithm and convince Amazon that there's demand there, because once they start ranking you better, then it's a flywheel that's self-promoting, right? Like if you already know this is an area where your product should sell well, once Amazon is giving you placement enough, then that it's going to sell, you don't really have to do it again necessarily, right? So even if you lost money on it, you'd probably be okay. And certainly if you break even, then that's ideal. And better than that, make some money on it, right? So that's why I say you probably could use a lot of different direct mail options, even the more expensive ones. And this probably would still work for you. But what I'm specifically referring to is something called every door direct mail. So it's something that U.S. Postal Office offers. I had no idea that it was a thing. Just found out about this recently. And it's an extremely inexpensive way to send out postcards, to customers in a particular zip code. Okay. So in effect, you can actually target a specific zip code or multiple zip codes. You can actually just target a city and all of the zip codes within that city, or you can actually target a specific street if you wanted to. But in addition to that, they allow you to demographically target. So let's say you choose Beverly Hills, 90210. Within that, you could then demographically target individuals in that zip code and restrict it a little bit further so that you can go by age, you can go by income level, you can go. There's a few other categories that you can utilize to specifically whittle that down a little bit, right? So you can be very specific in your targeting. Now, this doesn't allow you to specifically target a particular individual who has a specific interest, right? Which you can do with, say Facebook or Google by keyword, and all that sort of thing. But what's interesting is, let's take pools. So for us, we sell specifically to a subset of customers who generally are in-ground pool owners. They're generally luxury pool owners. That's kind of our market because we sell a very premium priced product. So we already know that, right? So what we can basically do is, there's a number of lists online that basically tell you in every single state, like you can choose any individual state and say, hey, what are the top 10, most prosperous zip codes in that state, right? So if I find out what that is, let's say, when I'm talking about Florida, I know all of Florida is almost without question all year round is warm enough for people to have their pools open. The households that are going to have in-ground pools in Florida are those households that have the greatest income, right? So I could essentially target all of the high income zip codes in Florida, and I know almost without question, most of the individuals in those zip codes are going to have in-ground pools. It's too hot not to have it. You have the money to have it. You're going to have an in-ground pool. So I can almost guarantee really good response rate in those particular zip codes because I know their pool owners, specifically in-ground pool owners. So for me, I don't have to buy a list that specifically targets pool owners. I can just use the EDDM service, select those zip codes that I already know are ones that are going to do well for us. I can even, if I want, specify a particular income bracket or whatever, but I don't really need to. And I can send these mailers out. So the way that it works, you pick these zip codes or these regions, right? You narrow it down by demographics. And you essentially can send mail to those locations, well, including the postcard mailer cost and the cost to mail it through the post office, 25 cents per customer. You can put your message in their hands, and you can essentially put, really, the entire message that you have on your Amazon listing, you can have on this postcard, right? So they already have all of the information that they really probably need to make a decision about whether they think your product is something they would be interested in ordering. It's all on the postcard. You can use an attribution link through a QR code. So you're going to get your 10% referral bonus back, right? And you can use with direct mail and with this EDDM service, you can send out only like 500 mailers, 250 mailers if you want. You can go really small and still get a pretty good rate on it. It's not going to be 25 cents, per customer, but it's probably going to be less than 40 cents per customer, even in very small numbers. So you can split test really fast. Like you can send this many, out with this message. You can send this many out with this message. Maybe it's 500 of each, right? It's not a very expensive mailing, at 40 cents a piece, right? You test it. Which one gets the better response rate? You're tracking it with an attribution link. So you have tracking on it, right? So now you know which one gets the best one. Reiterate that again and just keep split testing that until you get a response rate that's good enough that you want to move forward, with a mass mailing, right? So split testing is really easy. It's very inexpensive. And for us, just to give you an idea of numbers, I did a calculation. And essentially, because we would get back the 10% referral fee and whatever, we already know what our average ticket is for an order through Amazon. It's like $70. We would essentially make about $75. We would make $50 per order that comes in on average on Amazon, because we're not paying advertising costs on Amazon, right? And we get the 10% referral fee back. So all we're paying for is the FBA fee, the COGS of the item, and that 5% that's left of the referral fee. So we make like $50 on that order, maybe 45, right? Well, think about it. If I can send a mailing out for 25 cents, if I get 1 in 200 of them buys, I'm breaking even on that. And again, I don't have to really do any more than break even on it because all I'm trying to do is juice it. If I do better than break even, if I double or triple, the money, well, now it's just a money machine. I just keep mailing these out as much as I want, which I'm juicing the algorithm with all of these zip codes that I'm trying to juice anyways. And it's a profitable campaign. So, I mean, I get the best of both worlds. I can actually be profitable and make money and just keep sending out mailers while at the same time telling Amazon these specific zip codes where you don't think I have demand, I do have demand.
So as
I
you're
want to
thinking
call out a
about that,
couple of things that makes it easy for you as a person that has a list of consumers that have bought your products before. You could layer in your data from people that have purchased before. You have 90% of their addresses. You could take the GeoRank data of where you're not, where you want more inventory based on you think sales are going to happen there. And I mean, you remove one part of a brand that has to like run a Facebook ad to figure out like, where do my consumers come from? How do I target them? You know where they are. You know where these pockets of people are with in-ground pools. So like that takes the knowledge that because you have that customer info, you can be a lot more targeted with your postcards that you send out because you know that within this 5 mile radius, we have 15 customers that have already bought our stuff. You know what I mean? So but that's one of the many, many advantages of having a consumer list that you can layer on top of things like GeoRank data.
Yeah, absolutely. You don't have to buy the list. I mean, you already have the list, right? You have the data. So not only does it give you information to figure out where you're selling and where you're not selling, right? But also it gives you that whole list of people that you could potentially mail. So there's a number of ways that you could skin this cat, but EDDM is an interesting option just because it's so inexpensive, that if you can find a way to get in the mind of the consumer and figure out what are the zip codes in which my product probably should sell well, right? Like, how can I figure that out? Then you could use EDDM and just target those specific zip codes if you know you're not ranking well there and juice that algorithm. And of course, even if you don't want to tie it to georanking, like this is still a strategy that would potentially be useful because if you can continue to iterate that until it's profitable and maybe extremely profitable, who cares about the geo ranking? Like just start broadcasting mailings anywhere that you think you could actually get sales. And it's a money printing machine.
yeah, and I think Matt, I want to go back to what you were saying there because the other thing, and I don't know if this is what you intended with this is that you can if you start looking at what areas those customers are in and you start looking at like when they bought their product. Now, for you, Mike, this may not apply, but for other people that are listening, in the sense of if somebody buys that product every 3 months or 6 months, or maybe it's a durable goods where they buy it every 3 years. Well, if you've got that data, you have a well built after purchase funnel, you can start sending them, a mailer 18 months in when they're going to start looking for that product. And I know that, you have to be careful with discounts on Amazon just because they credit that sale differently. So if you offer a 70% discount, then you're not going to get the same amount of credit as if it was, a 10 or 20% discount or no discount on that product being purchased. But the nice thing about this is being outside of Amazon, it gives you an opportunity, maybe an easier opportunity in order to add value. And there's a million different ways that you could say, hey, when you buy this product, you also get, X, Y, or Z. And that could be another product.
Oh, yeah.
It could be, a value add education. There's a ton of different things that could be.
And the beauty of this too is that there's no restriction on what you can say in your ad, right? Like, I mean, if you're putting this postcard in their mailbox, you can say anything you want. Like, I mean, obviously don't be unethical, be truthful about, but Amazon is not standing between you and the customer in terms of what you can say. We all know that on our listing, there's certain things we can say. There's other things we can't say. There's certain ways that we can do things. There's ways that we can't do things. Amazon is in control of that. Yeah, you can kind of manipulate that one way or another a little bit, but ultimately, if you're sending a postcard, you can say anything you want. Your message gets in the hand of that customer, and I think it's really powerful. Also, if you're afraid that direct mailing would not get the kind of response rates that you think you should be able to get, and you still think that, email is less expensive or, maybe any sort of digital marketing is less expensive, I would argue that you should research this a little bit more because I kind of had that same impression. And everything that I'm reading suggests that if it's crafted right, like once you do enough iterations of your message and you really do some good split testing on it, you should be able to get a 5 to 10% response rate on postcard mailings. And I would argue, well, I wouldn't argue, I know this is true because a lot of professionals in the space, have clarified this, is that that's cold response rates, right? Like that's sending a mailer out to somebody who knows nothing about you. If you're sending it to a customer list that you've already built and you have the physical addresses for because you are running a warranty or a guarantee or whatever it is, right? Then you have the likelihood of a much better response rate because it's a customer who already bought from you. So as long as you're selling a good product, the majority of those individuals probably like the product that they bought from you. Maybe they forgot about you. Maybe they didn't come back and buy again, but it doesn't mean they didn't like the product or like your brand. So you still have a much better chance at a better response rate from them, if they're a previous customer than if it's just a cold mailing.
Yeah, and I think that's a good point. I mean, we're so used to digital and e-commerce, but the reality of it is whether it's Google or Facebook or Amazon, for certain categories, your cost per click has gone up dramatically. And this
Sky
is one of
high.
those areas where I think a lot of very few competitors are actually looking at this and are able to or willing to pull something like this off. So the fact that think if you can think about it, getting it at a 25 cents cost per click and figuring out how to make that convert as external traffic, that's an amazing opportunity.
Yeah, absolutely. Something that just came to mind that I hadn't even occurred to me is that you potentially, like, I haven't fleshed out in my mind exactly how this would function, but something in me tells me that you could pull this off. I don't know how you track it exactly, but here's the idea. So you send out this mailing, right? And advertisement for your product, whatever, a QR code would take somebody directly to your listing, right? You could have a second QR code that's a referral QR code that allows them to share your message on social or something. You use this QR code and it takes them into a contest, like an up viral drawing or something like that, where they can share this and potentially earn the product for free if they refer a certain number of people. So you could have a dual message on this one postcard where one QR code goes to the listing just to place an order direct, and another one is like, hey, if you don't want to spend that kind of money, you could earn it free, or you could earn 50% off, just share us on social or whatever. It might be a way to get some extra juice out of that postcard mailing and get a little extra response rate out of it.
Yeah, and you got two sides to the postcard. So again, I think it goes back to that iteration. You got to find out what works. The other thing is, I don't know if anybody does this. I'd be curious. Is I wonder if you'd be able to send postcards. So I mean, especially if you have that customer list and you have their addresses, can you send could you send postcards to their neighbors? So that the Smiths at this address bought one of your pool poles, and then said something, that, and I mean, you want to make sure that you're protecting customer data. So you might not want to have, hey, the Smith next door bought, but you could say, hey, one of your
Right.
neighbors bought this product and really enjoyed it, something to that effect.
Yeah, you probably could pull something like that off at a minimum. Like if you know that you've got a fair number of orders that have come in from a particular zip code or a particular city, right? Like you could send that, and it's a true statement. Like, hey, your neighbors in whatever town, or whatever, are purchasing our product. Like that's certainly a message you could say, truthfully. And I think it's one of those things where there's always kind of a fine line, right? Especially if you're selling to particular demographics who have, let's say, more concern over privacy or things like that. Like being careful how you tailor your message so it doesn't sound like your big brother and that you have more information than you ought to have,
Yeah.
Yeah, you don't want the situation like Target had, what was it, a few years back where like they were sending baby mailers to people before like their family even knew that they were pregnant.
Right. Yeah. Right. How do
That
you know
definitely
this? You
caused some
shouldn't
problems.
know this. This is not information you should know. Yeah, exactly. But I mean, like I say, at the end of the day, I mean, really, you're just taking two very critical and very, I think, productive strategies and just putting them together. Like I honestly think that there's a lot of ways that Amazon sellers could be effectively using direct mail tactics to push more volume, more sales volume that their competitors are likely not doing. But then when you combine that with this strategy of trying to juice that algorithm in terms of, your geo rankings, like, I just think it's such a powerful, opportunity that, people should be paying attention to it.
So with that said, I think a good place, as we kind of wrap up here, is what advice would you give to brands that are listening out there as far as kind of the first maybe couple of steps to look into this?
So, I'll tell you, one of the first things that I would do, in fact, let me grab my phone, because first of all, if you are having doubts, let's say, about direct mail and the opportunity that I'm kind of promoting here, the first thing I would do is I'll point you, and I haven't gotten through this book yet, but I'm reading through it, and it's an interesting read, and it's worth paying attention to because, one, not only, why does it say I have no internet? Not only is it a useful book in the sense of helping you recognize the opportunity that exists here, right, with direct mail. Like, he's going to tell you a whole lot more than what I'm going to tell you. But also, it's a very tactical book in terms of helping you understand, because you can send postcards, you can send, letter mailings, there's all different ways that you could direct mail a customer. It doesn't have to be a postcard, right? And this guy goes through a lot of a discussion of the strategy of direct mail, what your messaging should look like, how you should present it, what the copywriting should be like, what the medium should be that you send it in, all of those things, right? The book is The Direct Mail Revolution, and I don't know if I have the author, Robert something. But anyways, The Direct Mail Revolution, I think.
Okay. We'll make sure to put it in the show notes. So anybody who's listening, we'll put the full name with the author's name in the show notes, and then probably, link it over to directly to the book. So that way, if you want to buy it or whatever, you can do that.
Yeah, that'd be great. I mean, you get the Kindle version; it's pretty inexpensive, but I highly recommend it. It's been a great book so far, and like I say, I'm not through it, but I would read that. I think it would be very good from a strategic, kind of tactical position in terms of making sure you get the mailing right and that you're walking through the process correctly. So that'd be thing one. Thing two, honestly, again, and I've said this before, take the time to check your geo rankings, right? If you're thinking, I don't think that's a thing, right? It's easy enough to verify, right? Just open up a private window, do a search on Amazon in various different zip codes. I guarantee you are going to see discrepancies in your rankings that you didn't know existed. Just pay attention to that, and then just start looking at, then take a step back. Once you recognize, okay, georanking is a thing. So now I have to figure out, what are the areas that I think my product should be selling best, right? Like, let's say you sold hiking gear, right? Certainly you could sell that hiking gear all across the US, right? But realistically speaking, depending on the type of hiking gear, maybe you're going to sell more of it in places that have mountains and a lot of trails and things like that, right? So start thinking through, like, okay, what are the zip codes and what are the regions where I honestly should be selling really well? And then start looking at those zip codes specifically, like, am I ranking in those places where I should? I can almost guarantee you some of those places you're probably ranking really well. Some of those places you are probably ranking miserably and you don't even know it. And the other thing to pay attention to is, if you can raise, what's the best way for me to say this? If there's an area where you should be selling well, and you think likelihood is if you are ranking well enough, you should have good click-through and conversion rates in that area, right? If you can juice the algorithm to tell Amazon to rank you better and you start selling volume there, guess what? Your overall sales volume goes up, so your rankings globally go up. So you don't just improve rank in that geo-targeted area. You improve all of your rankings, because as your BSR goes up, all of your rankings go up, right? If your CTR and your CVR in that area are high, because it's, those are hikers in that area, so they're going to be very attuned to your product, right? If the CTR and CVR are higher there, guess what? The more sales you run through that area where you've got high CTR and CVR, the better your global CTR and CVR goes up, which means your rankings increase. So geo targeting and geo ranking is not just a focus on that area. It helps you in that area, which is good, but then it's going to help your global rankings as well, which means your overall search volume everywhere is going to improve as a result of targeting those areas where right now you're not ranking, but you should be.
I just thought of a really
Okay.
good use case for this for someone in your category, Mike. Let's say someone that sells a seasonal, like a warm weather seasonal product, like pool poles and things like that. You know that you do well in a part of the country that right now people aren't even thinking about their pool, like the Northeast, for example. There's a lot of high income people in the Northeast that have in-ground pools that are
Yep.
completely closed right now and aren't even thinking about it. So you know that in May that starts to pick up. So like similarly to like preparing for a tent pole event, your tent pole event is warmer weather. So you could start juicing up that algorithm up in the Northeast in March, and where it's a little bit cheaper and nobody's doing very much volume. If you can get 5 or 6 sales in a place where people are a little bit forward thinking and start upping that algorithm, you'll be ahead of the rest of the category by the time the warm weather gets there.
Absolutely. For sure.
Yeah, that's a good point, Matt. Where at the very least, you could use that correlation with the Amazon data to say, okay, I'm starting to see, moving, especially if you have a seasonal product, I'm moving into the season. Either I want to send those, postcards or whatever external marketing I'm doing ahead of that to be prepared, or using that data to say, okay, now I know that the season has kind of, quote unquote started. And so that external traffic is even going to be more effective as people are kind of in that buying phase.
And you know what? Actually, I appreciate the fact that you mentioned that, because it's the one aspect that I didn't mention, and that is, this is external traffic. Remember, Amazon loves external traffic. So it doesn't matter. They don't care where you're bringing it from. Yeah, there might be certain, variations of external traffic that maybe they give a little bit more weight to. But ultimately, if you're bringing them customers that they didn't bring in themselves, they are going to give you better ranking just because you're sending them external traffic. And another thing, when you put these QR codes on your mailers, right, send them straight to your store, or straight to your product page. I mean, better straight to your store. Because what happens when they're in your store? There's no competition in there. It's only your product, right? So your conversion rate on those sales is going to be better than if you send them to your listing, where potentially you've got other, competitors that are on that potentially draw their eyeballs away. So if you send them straight into your store, your conversion rate is going to be, sky high compared to the norm, because you've already pre-sold them, right? Remember, if the postcard mailing is done right, you've given them most of the important information that they need to have before they even get to Amazon. So your conversion rate should be sky high if you send them to your storefront.
Yeah, and the nice thing about your storefront too is that you could even set up essentially a special landing page to
Absolutely.
speak specifically to that audience, almost like you would off of your own website. But like you said, it's on the
Yep.
Amazon store, which means that they're already on Amazon. There's no other competition until they click on that listing and click buy.
Yep.
And we've
Absolutely.
definitively proven with some of our bigger partners that the average cart size is a lot bigger on your storefront than it is on sending it to your listing too. So there's another reason for sending it to your storefront.
Absolutely. It is for us. Our average
Mm-hmm.
order value, if I remember correctly, last time I checked it, I think it was like 40% higher than
Mm-hmm.
than than anything else. If they went to the store, we sold 40% more product.
All right. Well, I think we're going to wrap it there for today, because I think that's a bunch of valuable advice for people, to give them another tool in the toolbox. And then, Mike, of course, as you go through this process, I know this is something you're working on. We'll come back when we've got some numbers. We'd love to hear an update as to how the process is working out, and more importantly, what you're learning from it, because I think that as brand builders, one of the things that's the most valuable is what we learn out of our process, whether it ends up working out or not.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, we're absolutely going to learn a lot out of this process, no question. But I mean, if you follow the logic through, there's really no reason to assume that this won't accomplish exactly what we set out to do, because it's just the way Amazon's algorithm works. We're juicing everything they want us to juice. I don't see how it doesn't, materialize the way we expect.
All right. Well, that just means that the folks out there, they're going to have to stay tuned and we'll have an update on how that process goes in a future podcast episode.